Now, I don't know about you, but I rolled out of bed this morning, put on my shorts and my shirt so as not to scare the neighbor's dog. Believe me, otherwise it's a very frightening sight. Rolled out front and I picked up the newspapers and I dragged it into the house. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning, all right, because I had to be here early for Directors College, 7 o'clock, had to do my East Coast calls. All right, so it's early and I'm getting up and I'm a little groggy. And I pick up the newspaper and I see a dot picture. Oh, that's familiar. I know that face. I start reading the article. And I say to myself, when did we get a subscription to the New York Post? Hey, this is, you know, and I look up at the thing and I say, Wall Street Journal. And I go, wait a minute, it must be April 1st. I must be in some sort of time warp. I look at the date and I go, June 23rd. Is there a June 23rd Fool's Day? No, I don't think so. So I start reading the article, and I finish the article, and I pick up the phone and call the law library at the law school, immediately asking to cancel our subscription. All right, saying this is dangerous material, our students shouldn't be subject to this, we have to protect them. And fortunately it was early enough in the morning that no one was there to pick up the phone. And I then, you know, sort of sat back and I said to myself, now isn't this a very interesting situation that we have on our hands here? All right, because there are so many different ways to react to the article. You know the poem that I read the other evening, you know, how do I sue thee, let me count the ways? Here I want to write a poem called How Do I Dope Slap Thee? All right, let me count the ways. The gravamen, so you know, you can say 30,000 things, and what you realize is just say one thing clearly and well. So let me try to do that as best as I can. The gravamen of the article, very simply, is that the SEC and Chairman Cox was not deeply involved in the transaction having to do with Bear Stearns and J.P. Morgan. Well, let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. I submit to you very humbly that the only thing worse than having the chairman of the SEC not deeply involved in that is having him involved in it at all. Now, there is a reason for this, and the reason is not deep, it's not profound, and it needs to be laid out. And it fits in very clearly with many of the things that we talk about here in Directors College. The idea of the chairman of the SEC being involved in this transaction, especially given the way that it turned out, would be viewed as a massive conflict of interest and related party transaction that would probably have his butt in hearings before Congress until the next millennium. Okay? Think about it this way. All right, let me explain why anybody with any sense about the process, which may or may not include some reporters at the Wall Street Journal, should be able to see this. When a bank gets taken down, how much money are the bondholders in the bank left with? Anybody, give me a round number. 0. They get wiped out. How much money do the stockholders in the bank get after a federal takeover if you're a federally insured institution? Nada. They get wiped out. Okay, so that's the baseline in terms of how the Fed deals with these organizations and the banking regulators deal with them. In this case, how did the bondholders in Bear Stearns make out? Bandits. Like bandits. They made money on this deal. Why? Because they had a Bear Stearns credit that was very shaky, and then it was taken over by what? J.P. Morgan. All right? The bondholders made out like bandits. What happened to the stockholders of Bear Stearns? All right, they made $10. Clearly much worse than the $100 they thought they had a few months ago, but infinitely better than the 0 that is typically dealt to shareholders of failed banking institutions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, It doesn't take a rocket scientist, and apparently there's a shortage of people who aren't rocket scientists, to figure out that if the chairman of the SEC was involved in a transaction that dealt those cards to shareholders of an SEC-regulated entity, that the charges of favoritism and unfairness and of promoting all sorts of adverse incentives in the financial institution in order to favor your own regulated entity would have been trumped up as a notion of regulatory capture that really would make Barry Bonds on steroids, all right, look like a stick figure. Only the Federal Reserve, whose interests were fundamentally contrary to having this transaction happen on these terms, could have made it happen. What you needed was the adversary counterparty on the other side of the deal, and that's the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, the people that would have to write the check in the event that the $29 billion of subprime debt turned out not to be $29 billion worth of subprime debt, and the primary regulator, whose responsibility it is to oversee and take care of the federally regulated institutions, where they know that the typical deal in these situations is infinitely worse than this one. That's the only way the deal could have gone down with any political or economic credibility. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the New York Post version, all right, of what happened in the situation. And again, in an article where the gravamen of the story is that the chairman of the SEC was not involved in a transaction where the rational thing for the chairman to do, for all the reasons that I've just described and more, is to stay away from it and let other people drive that bus. If you get that premise wrong, imagine what you do with the details, okay? If you get the big picture that wrong, it's not hard to see how you get the details that wrong. So, with that by way of an introduction, my philosophy very simply is, if there's an elephant in the room, shoot the bugger, okay? And this was actually quite an easy elephant to shoot, all right, for all of these reasons. And hopefully with that elephant lying all four up on the floor, I'll introduce Cy Lauren, who will introduce our speaker this evening.